In my last video, I talked about climate change, kind of defined what it is, how it works, some of the causes of climate change, and a few of the impacts that we're probably going to see. I also briefly touched on the political issues surrounding the kinds of debate we're having over climate change. So I thought, heck, let's look at a few political issues today and talk about how climate change will impact them and what kinds of debates we should see in the climate change scenarios. When we're talking about climate change and its impacts, one of the major impacts that we have to consider is sea level rise. As temperatures increase, ice caps melt, we get more sea. That's how it works. But what kinds of problems can this cause? So I thought we'd first look in the United States. Here's a graph showing a 1.8 meter increase in water depth or sea level and what areas are majorly going to be affected. The dark blue is very deep water, light blue is shallow water, and that thin, like kind of light greenish brown is the wetlands or areas that will also be saturated. So let's take a look at this graph. There are many problem areas that I see with this. We have a lot of our main political hub, like Washington, that is going to be encroached more and more with rising sea levels. And perhaps the biggest thing of all is Miami. Miami is almost completely dark blue in this graph, showing it's going to be underwater and by a lot. So if Miami goes underwater, how does that affect someone in Nashville, Tennessee? Well, it's caused by it's they're going to be impacted by the movement of people. Whenever an area becomes uninhabitable, the people that live in the area, and Miami being a big city, that's a lot of people, are going to have to move. Whether that's to a different part of the state or another state, we're going to see a large change in how our system is structured, especially considering many of our major cities are near the water. First, we'll see Miami go, then maybe next, New Orleans will be underwater, and eventually a lot of how we do things today is going to be changed, and where we do them might be underwater. And this can cause a lot of problems for people. If a lot of people from Miami decide to move to another large state or another large city, such as Tampa, maybe there's not going to be enough housing, there's not going to be enough jobs, there might not be enough infrastructure to really support them, lessening the overall quality of life of people in that area. But what I really want to focus on is immigration and the movement of people out of countries and into other ones and massive movements of people. So I first wanted to look at the example recently from Germany. Germany took in 890,000 refugees and received 476,000 formal applications for political asylum. It's the highest they've ever seen. And they took them all in. They said, hey, we want to help you guys. We understand you're in a bad spot. Come to our country. Well, this had massive ramifications for their political structure. How their government works, they have to form a coalition between different political parties. And what ended up happening was Germany was without a government from the September elections all the way until the next year's March because they couldn't form a deal. And one of the major issues was what are we going to do with the immigrants? Are we going to accept more? Are we going to deport some people? What is the plan? And a lot of the different parties had a lot of different views. And so an agreement was really, really hard to come by and caused massive political backlash from the people. Now, I'm not saying immigration is bad. There's many studies out there that immigration is actually good, but that's in the long term. And a lot of the short term, there's a lot of cost to getting people into your country, establishing them, let them settle down, involving them in the workforce, and slowly you start to see a massive increase in economic productivity. You can help with some aging populations and other things like that, but that takes time. And with climate change, we're going to be seeing sea level rise, which will impact not only the United States, but a lot of other countries too. One of the prime examples is Bangladesh. So, in Bangladesh, there are a lot of people. And here's a graph showing what would happen if 1 meter of sea level rise occurred. And what would happen is 15 million people would be affected by sea level rise if it was just 1 meter. And if it's 1.5, 18 million people. And that's just 1.5 meters. In fact, sea level rise could be much more. The goal of the Paris Climate Accord is to stay under 1.5, but it's basically a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global temperatures. But its overall reachable goal is 2 degrees Celsius in average temperatures. But by with an increase of 0.15 degrees Celsius, we could realistically see this 1.5 meter increase in sea level. And honestly, a lot of people are starting to believe that the Paris Climate Accord won't be able to meet their goals, and we will get much, much higher global increases in average temperature, leading to much more sea level rise. Now, if we had an entire government, long-standing government of Germany, that was completely disrupted by almost 1 million people, or a little bit over about 1 million people, moving into their country, imagine what happens when 18 million people need to move. And that's just with 1.5 meter. If we see 3 degrees increase, 4 degrees, 2 degrees, it'd be even more and more people. Imagine if the whole town of Dhaka got was made underwater. It'd be max exodus of people, which would cause a lot of political problems for a lot of countries. So what kind of like so now that we know this, we know hey, sea level rise is going to occur. We can see many people getting displaced and many people needing help. The kinds of political discussions we should be having is those of all right, how are we going to solve this? Are we going to accept people period? Are we going to deny everyone that tries to come into our country? What kinds of resources are we going to give people we do allow to come in? How are we going to integrate them? Those are the kind of discussions that we need to be having, not discussing whether or not the sea is going to rise. We know it will. We need to look at its impacts and decide how are we going to handle these 18 million people or more that are going to be displaced.